let's call to order the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting. Let's start with the reviewing the minutes of December 4th. If there's any comments or edits to them, please speak up.
I'd make a motion to
Here-
approve them.
Oh, I see Lindsay's. It doesn't look like you're muted, Lindsay, but I saw your lips moving.
Can you hear me now?
Can't hear you. I understood that. She doesn't know what the issue is.
Let's see. I think the volume is coming.
Try and speak again.
Try to speak again, Lindsay. BCTV is,
Hi, can you hear me now?
Nope.
nope, no.
Give me a quick second, sorry about that.
We have a little different sound system for BCTV tonight because they have about 5 meetings going.
Oh, Sarah said that, wait, Sarah, you can hear me or you can hear Lindsay?
I can hear Lindsay.
Lindsay. Oh,
Really?
so the Zoom world is separate from the analog world, I guess. Lindsay's typed that I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from December. Oh, great.
Oh, good. I second.
Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say something. Yep. Lindsay, myself,
Yeah.
John, and Sarah's hand is up. Okay, great. Minutes pass or are approved unanimously. And hopefully BCTV fixes the.
Good now.
Okay, Lindsay, do you want to try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Great.
Okay, great.
Okay, moving on to announcements. I just have one, which is that you all will remember from last meeting or the one before, we were talking about bicycle parking, and maybe 2 meetings ago, Jonathan Weber of Local Motion was here presenting, and he's offered to respond to some of our interest in getting more data and more rationale for that, the presentation that he put forward, the proposals, or the kind of versions of it. And he offered to do the legwork and put together some materials and background and some data and present that at the February meeting. So expect to see that in February. If you're wondering where that agenda topic went.
Would he typically take that to staff to review before he presents it here?
He will share it with us.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at it, but
I mean, I wouldn't expect you to redo the data, but it would be nice to have, I don't want to be negative, impartial eyes. And, people that prepare these reports professionally to look at the data, just to make sure it's in the right format and all the rest. Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Good idea. And I think he's well aware of the deadline for getting materials in. So, but I'll remind him, or we can. Any other announcements? I don't think so. I think all 4 of those notifications in the chat we saw. Okay, moving on to the first agenda item. This is revisiting a topic of last month, which was a proposal to amend one of the standards in the neighborhood center zoning district. There was a representative of a proposed Valvoline development on Putney Road, where the current stop and go oil changes. And we heard that proposal, and questions and comments were had. And since then, staff has looked into what kind of motivated and the context behind the current standard as it is, and prepared a memo to give some context to this, as far as the town's history and the Planning Commission's history on this topic. So I don't know if staff would like to say any more about that or frame
I'd
it
like to
for us.
just speak to it
Okay, thank you.
briefly. So I want to remind the Planning Commission that your role as a Planning Commissioner is really kind of the high-level policy. And I know that this is a request coming to serve a particular parcel. And, you know, obviously when you're making decisions about standards and zoning districts. you
Hey,
kind of-
Sue,
Mhm.
it's really hard to hear you. I could hear you a lot better when you were using your computer mic.
Just pull it closer here.
I'm just gonna, is this a little bit better for you, Sarah?
Yeah, it's way better.
Okay. We're using the mics in the room, so just had to pull closer. Yeah, so I wanted to, you know, just speak a little bit about what I wrote and remind the Planning Commission that, you know, your kind of role is looking at zoning from a policy level and what are the overall goals that we're trying to achieve in a district. And of course, with any amendment, kind of looking at what are the constraints kind of at that district level. So the town plan was done in kind of initially in 2012. And prior to doing that, we did a review of our commercial zoning districts in town. And at that point, there were 3 different master plans. And what we were trying to do was look at each master plan and kind of have a more cohesive strategy for our commercial districts. We had a lot of areas that would allow for commercial development. And the market kind of wasn't, you know, really, that wasn't the way the market was going. So what we wanted to do was to kind of, you know, try to stimulate improvement within existing commercial areas, and also, particularly in the Putney Road area, have more of a mix of residential and commercial uses. Putney Road is pretty much dominated mostly by commercial. There is some industrial uses off of Putney Road as well. So we really wanted to spur more residential development there. And that may be slow. We know that the housing market is difficult. And so really it was about improving the commercial districts. And one of the ways of making it more attractive for residential development was to make it more walkable and to kind of have a move away from some of the automobile-dominated uses, really encourage sidewalks, buildings, particularly in this neighborhood center zoning district, encourage buildings that are closer to the road, having less pavement dominating the landscape, and you know, ideally to encourage mixed-use development, have 2 stories, you know, one with maybe retail, commercial, or office, and above that might have residential. So that really was the intent of the neighborhood zoning district. In the adoption process, there, if you could see in the table I wrote, I'm sorry it came out so small, but one of the comments that we did receive in the land use regulation adoption process back in 2015 was a concern that there were lots of garage bays that face the roads in the neighborhood center. And at that time, the Planning Commission decided to accept the staff's recommendation that we still require the garage bay doors to face the side. And again, that relates to having a more walkable development scaled towards pedestrians and not automobiles. So, so I just wanted to bring that background to the discussion. I know that there was a lot of conversation about the particular site or the desired development, and I just wanted to bring it back to that higher level of why these decisions were made at that time. And change is slow. We don't have a really robust commercial or residential market right now. So I think the question before the Planning Commission is, you know, if you're going to recommend an amendment, one is to make sure that it is compatible with the town plan, because that is a requirement. The land use regulations must implement the town plan. And then the second question, I guess, would be is, you know, is the greater good of it outweighing, you know, the desired effect of the zoning district into the future? that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess all of us commissioners have seen the memo and had time to think about it. I guess we can ask clarifying questions or
I have some,
express.
but I don't want to necessarily be first.
Yeah, I'll go with Lindsay first, or ask, the person Mr. Wilson proposing isn't an applicant per se, but I can't think of the proposer questions. I guess that's a good term for you instead of applicant. Or, put forward your opinion so that way people can respond to that. Lindsay, let's hear from you.
So I think my inclination is to not do an amendment. And part of the reason is that all the stuff that Sue just said was kind of what I assumed was the plan. And that all makes a lot of sense to me. I see a lot of people walking on Putney Road. I would like the experience for them to be more pleasant. The proposal seems very specific. And in thinking more about it, I wondered, he expressed how important it was for people from the street to be able to view the fullness or emptiness of the bays within the facility. And I don't really see that as necessarily requiring there to be doors opening towards the street. People could achieve that in a different way. They could have large windows that make it accessible to see inside. So it doesn't really seem necessary to me.
Okay, thank you. John?
I have a couple of general questions that will affect my vote on the specific amendment issue. Sorry. I have a couple of general questions that will affect my vote on the specific, so it does actually pertain to the agenda item. I drove the West River cross of Putney to Landmine Hill. Is that
Landmark Hill.
Thank you. Today. Is that the area we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. As background, I lived in a neighborhood center type district. We didn't call it that, but it was, lots of walking, all the rest. The area I drove today looks nothing like a neighborhood center district. It's commercial. And so my question is, after the town approved this rezoning, if you will, did the town budget any money to help with this transition to a neighborhood center? I mean, there's no sidewalks there. The shoulders, are either very narrow, or you have those little gullies that make bike riding impossible, of course. And again, if I'm wrong on any of this, please correct me. But
No, so part of that, the idea of transitioning it to a neighborhood center is that is state highway there. Route 5 is controlled by the state. The state has plans to redo Putney Road, basically from the West River all the way up to Exit 3. The conceptual plan has 4 roundabouts. It includes sidewalks on both sides of the road.
so slowing
Bike
by
lanes.
the roundabouts.
Yeah, they'll be reducing the number of left-hand turns because of the roundabouts. There'll kind of be a center median in some areas, somewhere, sometimes it might just be a double yellow line.
So when's
that-
the timing on that?
Yeah. Well, originally it was 2024, 2025. It's been pushed back at this point, we believe. I know that they've had some discussions with property owners around there, but it has not gone into permitting or even right-of-way acquisition yet. So
I don't want to.
definitely
really
later.
Careful not to make this a real personal conversation. I have enough information now to vote.
You don't have the second question? You don't want to ask the second question you alluded to?
I'll just tell you what my
Well,
opinion is.
okay.
The city said, you may look like a crocodile, but we're going to call you an elephant. And they didn't really apply any money to helping that area transition. And it still looks like a crocodile to me. And I think, quite honestly, if it's been now, 11 years since the master plan? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, 2012 was the original town plan, yeah.
So 11 years, and then we're talking about another 5 to 6 if, the Vermont budget stays the way it is, blah, 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 plans change. I would vote for the amendment. I think it's unreasonable to simply make arbitrary decisions. And, I mean, this is economic benefit we're losing. There's $1 million, right? It's $1 million building upgrade, and it improves that area, which is kind of cheesy, frankly, when I went by it. My personal opinion. But, so anyway, that's my vote. It's a democracy, not a consensus. So.
Well, let's hold off on official votes, maybe,
Okay.
but just.
But that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. But then there can be a chance for responses. And Sarah, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. This may have been at maybe the very beginning of the gentleman's presentation last month about wanting to propose a change. If I now forget the name of the big company doesn't purchase this building or take over this building, does that mean is stop and go, like, are they leaving? Like, is that going to be a vacant building if they're not sort of scooped up?
I suppose that could be answered quickly. Okay. Are you able to hear that, Sarah?
No, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, please come up to the microphone.
No, it will not be a vacant building after, but the state of the building is such that it desperately needs to be redeveloped, and it's extremely expensive to put forth attractive commercial development. And this is just one of many franchisors that have that type of budget available to them. So this is our first option and not necessarily our last, but that building needs to be rebuilt.
Sorry, are you with Stop and Go or
The property owner.
property owner? Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Sarah?
No, I think that's it. Thank you.
Sure, John.
I actually have another question. That was a good point that was brought up. So if we,
Can you lean in just a little bit? It's hard to.
Put it inside your mouth.
put those rocks in, come on. So if the amendment's not passed, if the property reverts back to the current property owner, what is the expectation of the city? That will we force any upgrade to the property to meet code, or will it be grandfathered?
The existing building's grandfathered.
Okay.
If
But let's say
the
they had to do work
regulations
to it
require,
for safety reasons or for.
so if they approve it, I'm sorry, I think it's if they approve it more than 50% of its assessed value, then it needs to come into compliance.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
I'm sorry, we're having a little technical issue with another meeting we're trying to get running, so that's why I'm a little distracted.
I apologize. Energy Committee is trying to meet as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess back to my earlier point about why I support approving the amendment, which I actually don't necessarily approve in a general sense. I think the idea that that's a neighborhood center should be reviewed. But the reason I would approve it is because it seems to me if we are saying that you have to spend less than 50% of the assessed valuation, or we're going to force you to come into compliance, we're incentivizing whoever owns those buildings to cheese it, right? To hack it, if you will. I don't know what term you want to use, but to spend as little money as possible to do the absolute minimum.
There's more to it than the 50%. There's also like if it impacts any, like the definition of significant redevelopment. Sue, I think she was just being brief for the point of moving things along, but there's at least two other criteria. One of them, it's like if any of the work affects the use within the space, if any of the structure, the framing, is altered. So it's stricter than that 50%.
But that would just, in my mind, further support my point that we're now forcing an owner who doesn't want to put the money into it, if you will, to try to meet current code. And, yes, there's 3-4 things, whatever, that they're gonna have to do, but I mean, if I was in that position, I would do, right? I'd try to cut whatever corner I could to not put a ton of money into a property that is, has to really be redeveloped, if that makes sense. So anyway,
Does,
that's
yeah.
my opinion.
Sue.
I
Yep.
just want to make a suggestion to remind you to kind of keep it at the policy
Right.
level and not this particular development. That would be reviewed by the Development Review Board. I mean, I think that, to your decision-making, maybe things like, how many parcels have garage bays? And I don't have this for you right now. I mean, maybe we could look at it really quickly. How many people have garage door bays and that maybe would be affected by redevelopment? Those would, I think, the things that at the policy level that we should look at, because it's not just this part of Putney Road. It affects Canal Street. It affects West Brattleboro, further out in West Brattleboro. So again, if you could not focus on the valvoline, because if you get too close into that, then, it's not.
So my question then to you is, first, why is he here? If we don't think he should be in front of us asking for an amendment. And I don't mean that to be argumentative. I'm just saying, should we just say, sorry, we've wasted your time, but you're not in the right place? And then secondly, would the question I asked, which is, why is this area considered zone neighborhood center? Is that a policy question, or is that something for DRB?
No, I think that's a policy question. And he's here because, I mean, the process for a zoning amendment, there's 2 ways to do it. One, the planning commission can just initiate a zoning amendment. And so that's why they're here. They're here to ask the planning commission to say, hey, would you take this up as a zoning amendment? So that's appropriate. And then the other way to do it is to get 5% of the registered voters, in which case they could then present it, if they sign off on it, they could present it to the planning commission, and then you kind of have to move it along the process.
Okay, so he should be here
So,
asking
yeah.
this question. Well, for what it's worth, I frankly think the real question is, should that area be neighborhood center zone? But
And that's probably a valid question. However, the town plan says that it should be a neighborhood center zoning district. So I think the next option to look at the zoning will, as a district as a whole, will be when we do the town plan, which will be in the next, will be coming up.
yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. And then I guess the other point you made, there is housing up there. It's just kind of behind.
There's a couple of apartments I saw. Are those
Yeah.
income restricted?
One of them is, I think both might be to the apartment building.
Again, this is a side conversation, but there's really very little food there, right? There's an Aldi.
Aldi's, Hannaford's.
Yeah, Hannaford's a little bit out of the area though, but
the road,
nevertheless, there's
Easy
not a
to
ton
walk
of
to.
food. So anyway, wrong conversation to have, sorry.
There's some relation. I'll put in the way I'm leaning now. I found, looking at staff's memo to be very convincing, and seeing the process that went into, the result of this provision in the neighborhood center district, and, the logic behind why it's there. I do feel sympathetic to, when our regulations come up against, what's economically feasible. And if it, certain regs that, in different people's minds may not be so significant are actually like project crushing, and, as, some developers will say. However, I think about what we recently did with the housing work, and which was that, for quite a while, it was known and generally believed that we're in a housing crisis. It's hard to make new housing. And then we had a study done, and that kind of showed, yes, it's so difficult. And one of the significant ways we can make it easier is to reduce some regulations, to make the process of building housing more economically feasible. So I feel like if our regulations are unduly strict and limiting with certain with commercial development, then the proper way of addressing that is with some sort of study and analysis of, what's the reasonable regs that, if the town feels like that there's, that the regulations are too strict and limiting on commercial, and we're seeing a real dearth of commercial needs for this community, then that's something we should look at. But just hearing from one potential developer that there's one standard that's making their project not possible, to me, is too kind of individualized for our process. And I think we should hold to the way that our, the way that this standard got put in our regs, which is backed up and described in the memo. Before a long response, though, I think maybe we can just finish hearing from commissioners, and then I know that's maybe a lot for you to respond to, everyone's comments, but because I assume you didn't have just something maybe brief, but longer.
I never talk long.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's just Lindsay maybe, and then we'll open it up. Lindsay.
I agree with what you said, Tom. I know that the development that the town was hoping to achieve with the master plan hasn't occurred yet, but I still agree with that goal. And I want to do what we need to do to encourage that. And I think that what the master plan has laid out and certain restrictions on the way things are makes sense for trying to achieve those goals. And I was going to say before, I did feel like we were veering towards spot zoning territory and trying to elevate ourselves back up. And maybe we need, if they want to continue this discussion, then maybe we do need the data that Sue mentioned, like how many buildings are there with these types of doorways, how many, but it's not just the ones that exist, it's what could exist too, right? So, yeah, I'm not convinced for a need for change at this point.
Anything else from you, Sue, before we open it up? Okay. Yeah, let's hear from the public.
Thank you for the feedback. Just to clarify a couple points.
No amendment.
One, we were just asking, the amendment we're suggesting is more of a grandfathering provision where we're not asking for new businesses that would have this, but if you currently have front-facing doors, you would continue to allow those as you redevelop. I guess another point is, as I read through and heard people, this is considered, the service station and is considered an allowed use per the plan, and it was agreed to that this would be a use appropriate for this district. So I'm not sure exactly how rotating the doors to away from the street encourages or discourages pedestrian activity and connectivity. And I still have vehicles circulating on the site. I guess I'm getting back to the point of that when they established this zoning district, this was considered a use that's allowed in this corridor, a service station. So it must have felt that it would fit in this district. I guess I'm still lost as to why or how a door facing one way or the other is a discouragement or an encouragement of pedestrian activity when I'll have similar number of cars on the property circulating. I mean, I know things with sidewalks along the frontage can be reviewed as part of DRB activity, as part of individual site plan, and I don't want to get to that level. We're trying to keep it global here. So I guess I'm not clear on that. And in terms of the number we're looking at, we had pointed that out in our memo to the town. There's currently 6 service stations or service with 5 of them having overhead doors that currently face the street. And more than half of those, per the assessor, are basically in need of upgrades. So they will be coming forward sometime in the near future, either closing or looking to do renovations, to those properties. So again, if the code is establishing a restriction that prevents, what I heard was to stimulate improvements in the corridor for a use that's encouraged or allowed in this zone, but there's a criteria that prevents you from achieving that use, those two things don't seem to line up for me. That you're, on one hand, you say it's allowed, but then you're imposing restriction. And in all deference to the member that said about the importance of visibility to the street, I can sit here and say that is absolutely essential to have visibility so the customer can see the queuing in the service bay, and it will make their decision whether to stop or pass by the site. I can't stress it enough. That visual cue is important. I would equate it similarly. You may have driven by indoor storage in recent months, and you see they have glazing now on the buildings where you can see inside to the indoor storage, and you can see into the overhead doors in those, inside that indoor storage. You say, why would they put, why would they spend that money on glazing and all that kind of thing on a building that is basically just storage? It's the same thing. Buildings, indoor storage that has those visual cues do better than ones that don't have that glazing on the building. And that's very inexpensive improvement to the building, but it makes or breaks the project having that visual cue. And it's the same thing here. When Valvoline is, anybody's looking to invest, I should say, in one of these things, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not in the millions. As I speak for my client, it's more than $1 million. And to restrict that visual cue that's critical to the business, you're not stimulating investment. And maybe part of the reason, there's probably several, I guess I could say, but maybe one of the reasons the district has sat and struggled to encourage investment in the last decade since you passed the code, that you're discouraging investment by having this restriction on this particular use. Was that brief?
Oh, you didn't,
Can I have your?
I didn't intend you to be
I'm sorry, I
brief at this
wasn't.
point, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Lindsay, let's hear your, well, yeah, I guess that's how we
just to
can do
be
it.
clear, what I said was I didn't understand the difference between having a wall of windows versus windows that essentially open. I'm not suggesting that people not be able to see things from the street. I don't understand why those windows need to be raised and lowered for entry and exit. I don't understand how that is different from just having a wall of windows if the goal that is to be achieved is people being able to see within the building. On those storage buildings, you can see inside of them, the walls don't open. So I don't understand what the problem is with a wall of windows versus bay doors.
Would the other members of the public here like to speak?
So my name's Celine LaCroix, both a property owner and also we are both landlord and tenant. So we operate Stop and Go as the tenant while also owning the property. So in speaking in a more global level, because I do understand, Sue, that this will impact not just one property, but the neighborhood center, and not just the neighborhood center on Putney Road, but also that on Canal Street. And forgive me if there's another location, but I know of those two. However, I believe all of the auto service centers are concentrated in the neighborhood center that is on Putney Road. There aren't any on Canal Street from our research. So in saying that vehicular service bay doors could essentially be grandfathered if you have them already would really only impact that one neighborhood center. So I understand the town's intention of trying to completely change what is and was developed as a primarily and really only commercial-centric district into a neighborhood center. But my question is, what option are you giving these businesses to redevelop if you take away their ability to do business in a commercially viable manner? And we've brought expert testimony in the sense where in this proposal, we've asked one of the largest Valvoline franchisees in New England, why are those doors important to you? And they said they cannot open a franchise, and they cannot operate without street-facing doors. If that's not an expert, and if we're not an expert at stop and go servicing 10,000 cars a year, then I don't know who is an expert in telling you that those doors are critical. That we have the doors open, and there is a distinct difference between a door and a window, especially when you're driving a vehicle through it. So we brought you expert testimony to tell you a window will not serve the purpose. We will not redevelop this property, and we cannot redevelop that shop without doors facing the street. So my question from a global standpoint is, if the town's intention was to, bring the buildings closer to the street and redevelop these with doors on the side or the back, and we're telling you that's not commercially viable, what option do the 5 out of 6 service centers have that have these street-facing doors? What option do they have when they go to redevelop? Because you've put them now into an incompatible zoning district. They are not supposed to be in the neighborhood center where they really fit as a service center. But the service center is just a little bit north. This property used to be in the service center, and so that whole portion of the neighborhood center was the service center until this was rezoned in 2014. So now they're in an incompatible district, which is why we have this problem. So if they can't redevelop where they are, and they should be in the service center, how do you think that anything is going to change on that end of town? They can't afford to move, and they're going to lose all of the path beaten to the door in the spot that they have now. For instance, we're a small business owner. The cost to acquire a piece of property in the compatible zoning district, which is a service center, and then build a building on top of that would financially ruin you. You can't open a business. And what about Brattleboro Tire, who has 4 or 5 street-facing doors? They cannot reconfigure that property if they need to upgrade that building. It's old. If they need to upgrade that, they cannot put the doors on the back because there's a hill. So I feel that in rezoning this, while I understand the global intention, there is a very specific problem in this district where none of these properties can redevelop with the existing automobile use, which maybe was the intention. But then where do your 10,000 people that get oil changes a year, where do they go? They're going to go to Keene, or they're going to go to Greenfield, because there's nowhere else to go if you don't allow these properties to redevelop in a commercially viable manner. So I think that what option are we giving these property owners in this district to redevelop? And, that's what the town plan wants, is attractive, high-quality construction, and that's very expensive. And very few local landowners can afford the type of high-quality construction that can be afforded by, a franchisor, which is what, has spurred this proposal. But overall, I think that the rezoning of that district did not take into consideration what's actually there and the need for the upgrade in hopes of a someday maybe future neighborhood that has not materialized. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if any commissioners have questions or responses just to what we heard from the public. And after that, I'm going to ask Sue and Steve a question about process.
I'll just say for myself, I have no business trying to determine what a properly run service station looks like. I'm not an expert in that area. I'll trust that these people are right. I know that when I take my car in, it's always to a front-facing bay, but that's just me.
I don't have any other questions.
Sue, what's the ways that this can go, right? To make any decision, we need 4 votes,
Yep.
right? That's what our bylaws say. Oh, that's what state law says, right?
Yep.
So that would mean all 4 of us need to be unanimous in some way. Well,
To move an amendment.
to move an amendment forward. If it's 3-1 in favor of the amendment, then it still won't move forward.
Correct. It needs to be a
Because there's 7 member slots on the commission. So a vote needs 4. 2 people are absent, there's 1 vacancy.
Yeah, so the vote to move it forward from the planning commission needs to be 4-0 tonight, or has to have 4 votes in favor.
Right.
If it's at the February meeting.
And if it was to move forward, then it could be part of a future revision to the land use regs, or it could be, what was that called, like a emergency amendment or something? We did that thing during
Be
COVID.
interim.
right?
I mean, it
Interim.
could go forward as a full amendment. I don't know that we could, I don't know. I'd have to think about it as an interim, proposing it as an interim amendment, because usually that has to be addressing some sort of
Right, I thought so.
crisis
Right.
type thing. So, if you wanted to try to make that argument, we could take it to the select board as an interim.
I mean, my only experience with it was during COVID, and we made some interim bylaw changes in
Yeah.
response to that.
But, otherwise we could move it forward. The planning commission could move it forward as a regular zoning amendment. You could hold on to it and bundle up a couple of other amendments if you knew they were coming. I mean, the amendment process is not quick. The planning commission has to have a couple of public hearings. The select board would have to have a couple of public hearings. So, you'd really be looking at it 3 to 4 months out if it was a regular zoning amendment. And that's like from tonight if you had 4 votes. If you wanted to wait till February when there might be more members here.
I was going to suggest that because I don't think I have 4 votes from what I've heard. And I would prefer the opportunity at least to talk to the other 2 board members and see what they had to say about it.
Yeah.
I'm more than willing to come back in February to discuss further if the board's so inclined.
What do you think of writing up something in response? Kind of like they can watch the meeting. Well, we can really record, we can really hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they watch.
This
yeah.
is recorded too.
It is.
Yes.
So we can look at it to make sure we got our notes in order. And
Yeah.
absolutely prepare a written response to what we heard tonight, absolutely.
Well, as I was saying that, I was also, you're absolutely welcome to do that, but I'm also thinking we can get the 2 absent members to watch the meeting and then give their opinion by email to you? No, because we can't, no. No, discuss it, no, because that's business
Discuss it
outside of a
separately.
meeting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Are any of the commissioners here, as Steve alluded to, going to, from what they've heard and thought, changing their position from what they
What are the
expressed?
official, should we just say what we want and see what an interim temporary vote is, or?
Bravo.
Yeah,
Straw vote, yeah. very
straw
good.
vote. Okay, all those in favor?
Sorry, Tom.
Oh,
Can I
please.
just ask another process question? So,
Yep.
for Sue or Steve, so if we don't get 4 votes, basically turning this down, are there other avenues for the property owner and the franchisee to sort of
Yeah,
get to the same conclusion, but not through the planning commission?
yeah. So the other way to request a zoning amendment is to get 5% signatures of 5% of registered voters. in
Sorry, you
Brattleboro.
said
I
that,
think
yeah.
it's 5%. I would probably, let me just double check that.
It may be 10% for that one, but maybe 5%.
That's of
It's outrageous. No, I know.
the town.
Yeah, it's an outrageous number.
Registered voters.
In my opinion.
It's a.
I tried
couple
changing
hundred.
that for other
I
things.
thought, I guess I'm now,
It's a big ask.
I'm now asking process as well. I thought this was a straw vote, and the final vote would be when we have the the votes or in-person, or attendance of the other two commissioners. Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
is this
this
the
is-
vote that determines it, if you will?
Well, it never determines it because like none of our votes are, the only binding votes we really do here are like when we move something from a public hearing to the select board. Like so
Okay.
much of what we do here is
So
just
he could come back
advisory
next
and
month
discussion.
with the other
If we
commissioners.
put him on the
and-
agenda.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, and free to comment during the, the public comment period. But I mean, anytime, members of the public or people are interested in the town, as long as I'm chair, I definitely want to hear from them.
Okay.
As long as there's, new material and, so, moving the process along. And
We're just looking at
Sue,
the percentage. Go ahead.
I think there may be a third option. I would hate to suggest going around the planning commission, but they could just talk to the select board, right?
No,
No? Okay.
no. I mean, you get the votes. If you get the signatures of the voters, then that kind of goes around.
To the town meeting, right?
It comes, no, it
Oh,
comes to
that's-
the planning
oh, right.
commission, and
Okay.
all you do is kind of review it, and then you start the hearing
Oh, right.
process.
Any land use reg
So
change
that's
always
the
needs to have
fast track.
a public hearing and vote with the planning commission first.
Let's take a vote and see where everybody stands.
Yeah, let's just see where we stand right now. And then we'll still find out about the other two commissioners. So who is in favor at this time of,
Can someone read what it would be again?
sure,
I have
Thank
it
I'll-
right here, going to be read.
I'll be able to get it in just a second. So the proposed standard, amended standard is vehicular service bay doors must be on the side or rear of the building. Well, I should say that's how it exists currently. And the proposal is to add, excepting locations where front-facing doors presently exist.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So tentatively, who's in favor of amending the standard?
I don't think the amendment is the right way to go. I think the zoning and the application of the zoning to this area have to really be reviewed, but that wasn't the question we're asked. So I am in favor of the amendment.
Okay, John? Sarah?
I think because I'm on the fence, I would probably vote no.
Okay. And Lindsay?
I feel kind of similarly to Sarah. It's like a 75-25 thing, so I think I would vote no. I don't feel strongly enough about it to change it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But that said, I don't necessarily have a problem with things advancing to the public, and having a public discussion. This is a democracy, so yeah. But I wouldn't vote yes tonight.
Wouldn't, you said?
No.
Okay. And I would vote no as well to changing it at this time. Okay. Thank you for coming and definitely raised some good points I acknowledge subjectively. But we will continue and hear from, find out from the other commissioners and
I do want to confirm it's 5% of registered voters, so you could speak to the town clerk's office and find out what that number is. It's probably a couple hundred. And then you could have people sign off on it, and we can talk about that if that's a route that you want to pursue.
Thinking town residents get free oil changes for the next 30 days.
No. No. I didn't hear that.
I got one question. And permit my ignorance on Vermont planning law. A variance is not an option.
No.
Why is that?
Variants need to run with the land. It needs to be a condition of the land. It's not, there has to be something about the land in particular that, is a barrier, kind of a physical.
redevelop it? Is it one of the standards we couldn't redevelop it any other way?
I think that's New
Yeah.
That is in
Hampshire's.
there, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Similar.
yeah, I mean, basically, if you can put something else on there and develop it,
All right.
it would be really
Yeah.
difficult.
It's almost the same
High bar.
standard as a taking, as far as Fifth Amendment case law.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
See you next month.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, moving on to the Historic Overlay District. So let's see, staff put together there was a request for this, more or less at the last meeting, to see an actual comparison of local historic districts versus design review districts versus what we currently have, an overlay district themed for historic preservation. And, at previous meetings, we talked about certified local government and demo delay and historic preservation committee. This, I think, is just kind of not making it so complex, leaving aside a lot of those things, just taking it one piece at a time and seeing these different options that statute allows for having historic preservation standards in land use regs, and looking at them and their pros and cons with each other, and any way we want to move forward or change what we have presently. Because over time, while I've been on the commission, there has been interest from some commissioners and staff and people on other committees for making changes to our historic, preservation and not liking it how it is for various reasons. So that's why we're looking at this.
My understanding of the discussion My understanding of the discussion last time was that this analysis, which, by the way, was an excellent detailed analysis, really kudos to you, would start the process of creating guidelines for when something goes into one of those categories, right? So this was the first step, right? How do we feel about these 4 different categories? And then the next step would be, when you have something like this, when it meets these qualities, it would go into, a design review district, perhaps, or it would go into a historic review district, or it would go into, God, I forget them all. Anyway.
I mean, that's I guess, a potential way that we could move forward as a town. We could have all 3 types
So to
and
the
put
point
things
of
in
this,
different.
the point of this is not necessarily to pick a good or a bad or choose. It's more like, let's make sure the commissioners all understand what these 4 different options are and the differences between them. And then the commissioners send to staff a clear message that says, here's the next steps. Now, I gave you my opinion of the next steps, but that's not the commission's.
No, I think that's well said there, what you said at the end there. Steve, do you want to frame it in any way?
It was so wonderfully detailed. I was telling Sue, I really need you to sort of simplify it for me.
Sure, yeah.
And just tell me where the differences are, really, would be big for me.
I think the most boiled down elevator pitch version is that right now we have a way of receiving applications that are involving land use on properties and structures that are considered part of our historic resource overlay. So when we take an application that involves a historic property that's within that, it has a process that it goes through at the moment. And what that process is most similar to, we had that discussion in the previous meeting, that it seems that it is an overlay district, which is one of those options that's provided for by statute. But we do have those other potential options, which are the local historic district and the design review district. Or there is also, of course, the option of not having a district on any given parcel or grouping of parcels. And so basically, this particular document was laying out the differences between those tools. Perhaps it could have used another section of basically the question that will be coming at some point, it would seem, if not maybe appropriate to discuss now, is to think about, currently we have, according to our official map, 4 historic districts that are within the historic resource overlay. The text definition of the HRO would seem to suggest that there are 6. And I think the only thing that's like absolutely urgent, needing an amendment about our zoning, is that discrepancy, so that we can be sure that we don't have a conflict there. And as we've discussed in previous meetings, that particular conflict or potential conflict is also working against us in terms of being able to get certified local government status with the state and the federal government, which would it's something that we established in the town plan as something that we should be moving towards or attempting to achieve. It's a goal. And then also it enables funding access. So for that reason as well, it would seem to be an important thing to address that specific piece. But that concern can happen with or without this broader discussion. Basically, what I'm referring to is, I think it's the very first paragraph of our current section 252, which is the historic resource overlay. And so that, where it says that any district on the historic or the National Register of Historic Places is part of the HRO, that basically has the potential of making it so that large-scale land use amendments or land use policy will be applied sort of without having the proper review. So essentially, if at the moment
So
SD
we could have places that are on the National Register of Historic Places in other types of the districts that you mentioned in your table, and it would not create a conflict with certified local government. It's only because they're in the HROs. Did I hear that right?
So the specific conflict is that we have language at the beginning of our HRO that I suppose I can just read off the statement for the record. But the purpose statement for the HRO, it says the Historic Resource Overlay District encompasses all National Register historic districts in Brattleboro. That's the first sentence in the purpose district. I think that specific sentence should be amended because if we were to even just define it by a boundary description that so happens to be exactly the same thing as the 4 districts that we currently intend on regulating as
Okay, so let me rephrase what you said in trying to understand it. So what you're saying is that the fact that the National Registered Historic Places are in an HRO with the current wording of the HRO creates a conflict, a roadblock to becoming a certified local government. We could move them to a different type of review district, or we could change the wording in the HRO material. Is that correct?
So that specific conflict is regardless of which of the tools, the regulatory types.
So if
in
they're
that
in
chart.
any district, if they're in any one of the 4 types of districts, that it will create a problem, an obstacle to being a certified local government.
Yes, and it's also possibly statutorily invalid.
Okay, good. So in other words, they truly are separate.
Yeah.
Whichever 4 we use doesn't have anything to do with the issue we have with certified local government.
Right. There's
Okay.
and even that isn't I would say the most pressing issue with why that specific section should be, or that sentence really should be revised.
Different issue, though.
They both stem from the same problem, which is that the National Register is its own thing. a property owner or even anyone who wants to nominate a group of properties, if you are going to nominate something for the National Register, you can do it as there are a couple different types of nominations. The most common by far is a site. And so we have many sites that are not within a district. And this is a National Register of Historic Places district. So for instance, there's, I'm forgetting what the name of the home is, but one of the oldest homes in Brattleboro.
Yes, Steve, is this, sorry if I'm not seeing the connection, is this getting us
not
into
seeing
the
the
weeds a
connection.
little too much and not actually?
I don't
comparing-
think so. I think
Oh,
this
okay.
is, I think this is
Great.
critical for understanding what the
Oh, sorry.
actual issue is. But
Great.
there are a number of sites that aren't within National Register sites that are not National Register districts. It's their distinction, but we're referencing that distinction that's made at the National Register as being what makes up our overlay district, which means that if they were to list a new district, which happens outside of our local land use process, if, for example, the SD Organ Factory was to update its register listing and instead decide to be considered as a district, I'm arguing that this first sentence here would require us, I don't see any wiggle room in the way that that's written, to consider that as being part of the HRO immediately upon that having been changed, which again happens at a different level that has no control at the local land use regulation level. So if we were to change that first sentence to describe the areas that are meant to be within whatever it is that the board moves towards for what is the appropriate regulatory tool, or more than one, whichever areas are going to be treated with some type of local land use regulation to protect their historic character or their aesthetic character, not directly connecting it to any time a change happens on this outside list, we must take that and put it into our overlay district.
Yeah, I apologize, I'm lost again.
But so if we want, we can just change that wording in the
Yes.
overlay district.
I think that
Oh, that was-
absolutely
and
needs
it-
to happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that our overlay district should become a local
Right.
historic district or design review district. It's just
Yep.
an issue in our current wording.
So
Okay.
let me ask another question. So what is staff recommending? Are they recommending we use all four of these? We continue on with everything goes into an HRO?
As far as I understand it, and I certainly invite Sue to chime in as well if I'm not representing the department or the town appropriately enough, but I don't think we're recommending anything specifically out of those four treatments at the moment. I think it's still a conversation that's intended to be had by the
Let
by
me
the
ask the
commission.
question a different way. Say a new potential district comes in, what would you recommend they be put into?
So at the moment, if a new district was added to the National Register, it would just become part of the HRO.
Well, I think that's debatable, though, because there's a discrepancy unless the maps update. I think it's something that needs to be fixed in the regs.
Yeah.
I would recommend that, what I would say is, this was set up with West Brattleboro, Horton Homestead, Clark Canal, and downtown, and that's all it should be. If a new district comes in, then we should reconsider it as to whether or not it should be part of this overlay district.
Okay.
So I think we need the text amendment to kind of fix that loophole right now, which there can be some debate over. So what my recommendation would be we haven't really discussed it, is to, let's fix this. There is interest in becoming a part of the CLG from other parts of the community. So let's fix these regulations so that we can get into the CLG program. I wouldn't say right now that I'm looking for the additional work that's needed to to have local historic districts or to have a design review district, just because we don't have the funding right now to complete that work.
Okay.
I do think that if we became a CLG, then maybe we could access some funding that could make that more feasible. To do.
That I get.
But there are definitely people in the community that would like local historic districts.
So putting aside all this information you're providing us, the call to action that you're giving us is that you really want to fix the text in the HRO regs, and that will enable us.
Mike, please.
Sorry, you're right.
Thank you.
So what you really want to do is you want to fix the text in the HRO, and that will enable us to apply for CLG, and then you don't have any, there's no call to action on the other 3 districts that you brought up at this point. Okay.
No, I mean,
From staff, there isn't.
From staff.
I
Yeah,
wasn't
not
here for
urgently.
the December meeting. One of the things that
Stu needs to also. Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think one of the other things that I was trying to test from the Planning Commission is, do you feel that the 4 districts that we have in the overlay district are appropriate? Because, the districts, some of them, I think you can clearly argue that there is a form and a type of architecture, or at least a variation of architecture, that we're trying to protect. I think others are on the register because of, maybe a point in history, or, they're not there because they're some architectural masterpieces.
Okay. I'm no expert on that.
So I guess I was also, with the December conversation, was hoping for some feedback on, do we even have it right with the overlay districts? If we're just focusing on them as an overlay district, do we even have them right?
I'll give some of my thoughts, definitely based off of Steve's memo's comparison of the 3 types. Well, I guess I'll frame it first, and I'll give a few details. I think I like the flexibility that the overlay district offers over the other 2. The other 2 seem to be pretty defined by statute about how you do the process and the terms of the regulations, so to speak. But with the overlay district, if you wanted to copy those things, it seems like you almost could. The overlay, I don't know if this was like a legislative oversight by the state, but it isn't necessarily true that there's one person who has all of the statutes in their brain memorized and can, previous one, anyway. So the overlay district, I think, gives a lot of flexibility and expansiveness to just kind of almost, to a large degree, regulate historic preservation how you'd like. The other 2 Steve wrote, would add significant administrative and regulatory workload and regulatory burden. One thing I didn't like, though, the one thing that makes me feel like, is there something better than the historic overlay district, is that, how did he write it? Is that the other districts, the design review and the local historic, can override the district's, the base district's dimensional standards and maybe other standards. So for example, I've felt that the Clark Canal neighborhood district, the Horton Homestead, one thing that's great and should be preserved about them is the density and compactedness and the small streets and the close properties. There's some disadvantages to that, like it's hard to paint your walls and put up scaffolding, but neighborhoods aren't built that way anymore, and that sort of density is a historic thing, and it's a cool thing, and I think there's benefits for getting people, close and having a lot of people close to downtown, because both of those neighborhoods are. And it doesn't seem like with the overlay district, we can override the frontage and setbacks that exist. I think was I correct in interpreting that from your memo, Steve?
I think so. I think statute is somewhat, it's quite vague in a lot of these distinctions, but I think, the overlay district overlays.
It overlays, it doesn't supplant.
Whereas, it would seem that the other two options are essentially they are a zoning district and their specific purpose is for this, be it aesthetic, more than individual structures.
Oh, so literally, if it was over some mixed-use parcels in some residential neighborhood, like a design review district or local historic district, then those would no longer become mixed-use and RN?
No.
Oh,
The underlying zoning district stays to my.
with its dimensional standards and,
I can take another even closer look at the existing ones in different communities. It's actually it's extremely unclear in a lot of ways because there are many communities, like us, that we actually call it an overlay district. So I'll not accuse us of muddying the distinction there, but there are other communities that will just say that something is a historic district or a design district, but it's very, very clear that it's being used as an overlay district, which there's nothing to say that you can't name it that. But it seems that the overlay district is more common as a tool, and that might be worth taking as a data point that maybe it's an easier thing to do.
So what you're saying is there might be districts that we're preserving for particular characteristics, that those characteristics don't actually meet the standards of the zoning in the district, and the overlay would not allow them to? Is that correct? Like you said that, maybe lot lines are too small, right? Or sorry, lot lines are very small in a particular historic district, but an historic overlay would not allow those homes, would not pass those homes in the basic zoning in the district.
I seemed to, our current historic overlay district only reviews and considers and regulates the architectural features of the buildings. And it seemed
Not adherence to current zoning standards in the district, if you will.
they have to meet those.
They have to meet those. Well, but doesn't that,
Oh, they have to meet those as well.
You guys are plenty close enough, you don't have to.
Okay, you can hear it fine.
Adjust it so you're all good.
Because
that seems to defeat the purpose, though, to me. I mean, if you have a district of narrow homes with very small lots, for example, and that isn't the zoning.
But other people may feel that all the districts were preserved for architectural reasons. Like they can always find, people interested in this can always find architectural reasons to preserve, buildings and those neighborhoods, for example.
That's an important point. Thank you for bringing it up.
For what it's worth, I think we actually don't specifically state in the land use regulations that that's the purpose of why these things have been added as historic districts to the HRO. I think there's description to that effect in the town plan, but not so explicitly as to say, the Clark Canal District is in the HRO because.
Right. Yeah, and that's a point that I would, my inclination is that, and looking at the town plan, is that the downtown district is, there's rationale in the town plan for why that should be preserved. And it seems like, to the extent that the town plan is the town community's document, that seems kind of pretty well spelled out to me. And the West Brattleboro Village Historic District has some description and rationale as well. But then all there is mention of the Clark Canal and the Horton Homestead of being historic, National Register of Historic Places, but not actually saying, and the community agrees with this and wants to keep it that way and keep it preserved because. So I would be interested in looking into, in the future, does the community actually care about those and putting the regulations on private property owners?
Okay.
Because I think those extra regulations should only be on the private property owners if the community actually does care
Yeah, of course.
quite a bit.
Yeah, of course.
Shouldn't just be, to benefit some commercial property owners from a couple years ago by getting them. Anyway,
Okay. It's really interesting. I just actually have one question. So if we had an area, geographical area that we wanted to preserve that wasn't clearly wanted to be preserved for historical reasons, and I'm trying to think of a specific example, but let's say a beautiful vista or something, right? Or a way that was historically done. Can we put that under an HRO within the current circumstances? It seemed like it would be more appropriate for a design review district.
Yeah, specifically the way that we've defined what the HRO is, and I would agree that we couldn't really do that, but as far as can we have an overlay district in general, as far as statute is concerned, that does that? Yes, and then could we, instead of an overlay district, have a design review district that does that? Also, yes, I would say.
Okay, so then back to my earlier point, you would have maybe two possible alternatives. One would be it goes into the HRO, but if it doesn't have a clearly historical reason for preserving it, then it would go into a design review district. Really simple branch, right?
To complicate it, no, not the branching of, is this a historic, and that actually is probably the critical distinction that I should have gotten to at the very beginning of the discussion here, is that I think that the overlay district has flexibility to do a lot of things, which is what's making this conversation a bit difficult to parse. But in terms of what was the purpose of each one of these districts within the overlay district that we currently have, was it site by site, these are historic properties and they're important for historic reasons, and that's why they need to be specifically controlled to prevent damage to that historic character that we consider valuable. I would say that you can do that with the overlay. That's what we're ostensibly doing right now. You could also certainly do that with a local historic district. That is quite specialized to specifically work on that. But if you didn't have that as the overarching value for why you are protecting one of those districts, so say, I think the assumption is that the Clark Canal and Horton Homestead districts are more valuable at a larger than single site scale, where the aesthetic of the whole area is more what is probably the community value, or ostensibly the community value that we would like to see that area preserved specifically, instead of each individual site in this district is critically important as a historic artifact. So you could do that with either an overlay district that is for the purpose of design review, which in a sense is also what our HRO is doing. Or you could be doing that with a design review district.
Okay.
So there's multiple choices.
Let me repeat back what I heard from you just to make sure I understood. Mm-hmm. You might have an area, I'm going to miss some of the terms, and you have a couple specific in mind that aren't necessarily preserved. You don't want to preserve necessarily for their historic importance, but for another reason that still makes them important to preserve. You could create a different overlay that wasn't the historic overlay. That's option one. Or option two is you could put them in a design review district. Now, understand the design review district comes with a whole bunch of overhead burden. I'm not talking about that now, but I'm just looking at the two options, and then you'd have to evaluate which the best of those two options is. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
And I think it
yes, right? Just yes.
Yes.
Okay,
and
good.
I mean, it hasn't come up specifically, but I think you can have as many overlay districts as you want, effectively.
Okay.
We've got 3 of them now. Yeah. It's possible that you could break all
So
of
if
these
you stuck everything in an overlay district, you could just have different overlay districts for different kinds of preservation purposes. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we could have the Clark Canal design overlay district, for instance.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
You know,
Multiple historic overlay districts.
Right.
I didn't even consider that as an option.
it came to me 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
I don't see their hands up, Lindsay and Sarah's, but I want to give the chance for them to weigh in, and we're getting close to the time, but we can go a little bit over. But I want to add that, and I definitely want to hear from staff after we hear from Lindsay and Sarah too about what more they want to get from us to move this forward. But when I saw that the design review district has the statutory requirement for review, that added layer of review I expected it to have it for things like structural changes, but when I saw it for use and change of occupancy, I thought that in general, I feel like that's kind of an overreach.
Yeah.
In my opinion, if the reason for the district if we were to hypothetically change the Clark Canal or the Horton Homestead or the West Brattleboro Village or the downtown districts, which are all preserved for historical reasons, whether that's the architecture or the general aesthetic feel of the neighborhood, I feel like it's just unreasonable and an overreach to have an added layer of review for if people want to change their house from 3 bedrooms to 4 bedrooms, if the walls aren't changing at all outside, and if they want to change it from a residential to office or from a house to a rooming house, that just makes it a no-go in my opinion. And the local historic district, I was only felt that had advantages because it could be tailored to each district. But now I'm hearing that a whole bunch of historic overlay districts could be created, so it rules that out. But then the other difference was I thought the local historic district could override or supplant the base district standards, whereas the overlay district cannot. But it seems like maybe there's not full sureness that the overlay district cannot, or that the local historic district can do it. So if that can be found out, then, and if the local historic district doesn't have an advantage over the overlay district in that mind, then it just seals the deal from what I've seen for me so far, that just stick with the overlay district. But I still have some modifications that I would like to see to the overlay district.
Any reason to give staff an added burden
Yeah.
of all that overhead.
Yeah. So I want to hear from Lindsay and Sarah about this topic. And I know we've hogged a lot of time, but we didn't see your hands up, so.
No, you didn't see my hand up because I find this very confusing.
Yeah. It is.
The thing that I heard you say, Tom, that I agreed with is I like it when people can do what they want inside their homes, essentially, and not and the outside is more of our purview than the inside. I don't particularly want to delay or impact folks on the inside of their house. I don't think that particularly relates to our goals and the purpose of the Planning Commission so much, and at least in this regard, in this issue. That's what I heard that made sense to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say similarly that this makes my head hurt. Excuse me.
Well, it's been hard to know how to move forward. I mean, this topic's come up even before I was a chair, just for like one meeting, and then it goes away, and then another meeting 6 months or a year later, and it seems like there's a lot to juggle in your head at once.
Well, with that in mind,
in this memo.
I think that we should keep pursuing. Even though it hurts, I think, to do it, I think we should try and see it through to the end and come up with something to put it to rest for a while.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe a little clarity can be found on that, the differences with local historic versus overlay and the abilities and.
Yep, we can do that. I also think, we have talked about this several times, so maybe, coming in with some suggested modifications to it as an overlay district.
Yeah, and
For
word changing, language change.
Get us to a place where we can do a CLG, and then if a historic preservation committee gets formed and they want to do local historic district work, they're just in the place where they can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the way I felt. If a historic preservation committee gets formed, and that's one of the steps of forming a certified local government, then not that they will have the power to create local historic districts, but they will be, in my opinion, they will be a body that cares about and has the time and the specialization maybe to look into it. That's actually one of their powers that can be granted to them. So I feel like we should do what we have the capacity and why. Ultimately, the decision is ours. We control in the select board the land use regs, but they may be a good body to look into the issue more.
So let me summarize what I thought I heard first for next steps for staff.
Okay.
Just to make sure I understand.
Yep.
One, the wording's going to be fixed on the historic overlays so that we're eligible, we qualify, I don't know what the right word is, for CLG. What, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Second is, you had some concerns about both the wording of the HRO and some of the legal issues surrounding the HRO's weight over
The base
baseline
district.
zoning, and that
Yeah.
needs to be cleared up,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, or further evaluated if there's some wording issues. I heard that actually the commission's recommendation, as much as we made a recommendation, was HROs sound fine to us. Why burden the staff with extra work involved with creating these districts, as long as we have a sensible grouping of the HROs? In other words, might have multiple HROs so that similar situations get put into similar buckets, if you will. Is that, I mean, I know I'm not using anything close to technical words, but is that accurate?
I think the first part was I didn't hear anything against just sticking with the overlay district.
Okay.
And I
So
heard
those were the three, those
Yeah.
were really the three, I think, recommendations,
Yeah.
if you will, that came from Planning Commission. Is that correct?
I think so,
Did
yeah.
I miss anything?
I mean, I have my own personal preference that I'd like to see, maybe the Clark Canal and the Horton Homestead just struck from the overlay district and held off to maybe the Historic Preservation Committee actually doing some work to justify putting them, because the town plan doesn't have justification for them. And I have my own personal rationale for why they shouldn't be. But that's, yeah. But as far as if we're looking at the language of our current overlay district now, that's language in it, but we can consider it when they bring it towards us.
The top priority is to get the HRO rewritten so that we remove.
Qualify for
whatever obstacle we
CLG,
have
yeah.
to CLG qualification. Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yeah. And then we could also review the bylaw for the creation of the Historic Preservation Committee.
Sure.
Because there's some choices that can be made there. I saw the document. I think it's up to the select board, not to us, but
is,
we can
yes.
send it to them with our tailored recommendations. Yeah. Anything else on this topic? Okay. Great, let's move on to
Dams.
5 or 10 minutes about the Connecticut River Dam relicensing. This is a topic not in the Planning Commission's purview, what am I trying to say? Not in our history while I've been on it, but through other things I've been on and paying attention in the community. The Connecticut hydropower facilities near us have been in a process of relicensing for years, and it's a big process, and there's multiple times for public comments. I thought there already were some in the past, but now there's another one. I don't know what's going on or which one carries more weight, but I know Sue has spoken most recently with our local Connecticut River Conservancy steward. That's an organization that represents the watershed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so I
wanna
just
frame
wanted to bring you up to date on where the relicensing is at and kind of a timeline for the town to submit comments and a proposal of how the town might submit comments. So Kathy Erfer is our local river steward. She's a former member of the Planning Commission, actually, as well. She sent out letters and actually met with the Conservation Commission because she offered to come and do presentations. We haven't had her here at the Planning Commission. We can do that, but the presentation that she has, I think, is similar to what she's given in the past years, which she's done for the Windham Regional Commission and I think the Select Board at one point. But anyway, the relicensing, after many stops and starts, is moving forward again. They are expecting public comments to open as early as March. It could be a little bit later. And what they're asking for communities is to kind of think about their requests on how first, Great River Hydro, can mitigate the impact of the dams on the communities that are along the dams. So a couple of ways that we can ask for mitigation can be, coming up with recreation plan, maybe invasives, whether it's aquatic invasives, maybe Japanese knotweed, which is all along our rivers and brooks. We could ask about tourism and marketing funding, maybe some more work on traditional cultural properties. Right now, they're not recognizing native tribes or indigenous people because they're not federally recognized tribes. So we could ask for Great River Hydro to be doing more in that way. I see you have a question, John.
I do, actually. So I don't have any opinion on dams, and I just assumed it was because I'm ignorant. And are there people actually, but I'm listening to you now, and my question is, I hope I phrase this properly, are there people actually getting impinged upon by the current operation of the dam, or is this a chance for us to ask for money to do great things because they're anxious to get relicensed?
I
have
can't
my
answer the community has been impinged upon, since dams were,
Like,
Like the flow.
So it's pretty.
like erosion.
You don't have to answer it for me. I just don't understand how the community would be impinged upon.
I mean, I'd say it's subjective, right? Some people see dams and they're like, oh, now there's a lake that I can boat in, when there was just a rapid river before. But other people will say, oh, this flooded farm fields and flooded some properties.
Sure.
And what Kathy and the Connecticut River Conservancy often bring up is that the water fluctuation levels, because of the dam's releases and holding,
Sure.
like apparently it could be done to in a way that erodes the land less.
Okay.
So there's like this 2 foot, let's just say, area where the water keeps fluctuating between, and it undercuts land.
I get all
So
that.
there's all
actually.
sorts of issues.
I'm not the right person, though, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when you asked that question. Okay,
Well,
got it.
yeah, I'll add, and I know Sue was maybe not finished, but I'll
Lindsay's got her hand up.
send it back to you. Just that, as the chair, I thought that this has relevance because, we consider the land use and development in town, and a dam has flooded some of it, right? And impacts some of it with its water level changes. And, we have a type of land use that, agriculture and forestry, and we don't talk about like hunting really and recreation too much in land use regs, maybe the town plan, but like fishing seems like something, that has some relation to what people do on land. And so, and what I envisioned, commissioners may have a different proposal, and I think the way Sue was kind of serving this up to us is that the town is tentatively planning to submit comments, and we could be a part of that process. Either someone on the commission can be more engaged, or we can just talk about it now, and we're at a future meeting too, and submit our own ideas for projects or ways that the dams, in Turner's Falls and Vernon and Bellows Falls and Wilder should do better. Because it's not just hydropower. It's also they're
No, I'm sure there's many
they're required by some federal law to also consider and do work with energy conservation and fish and wildlife habitat and
Sure.
and some other things, recreational.
I thought somebody had their hand.
Yeah,
Lindsay
but-
did. I don't know if she still wants to speak.
No, I was just gonna talk about the many impingements, but it
Oh.
sounds like the question has been answered to satisfaction, so I'll hold my tongue.
I covered it well enough. Okay, thank you. Sue, we
Yeah.
interrupted you. Maybe.
It was worth mentioning. I think Kathy said that it was the Clean Water Act that sort of frames what can be asked for.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it might help add some context that
Okay.
the mitigation that's specifically being discussed in these comments to the relicensing committee. I believe Kathy said when she presented to the Conservation Commission that it's coming out of each state's interpretation of the or implementation of the Clean Water Act. And so Vermont is, I don't know about unique, but it is at least uncommon in adding recreation and some other aspects of mitigation that other states like, I believe she said that New Hampshire and Massachusetts might not have added those categories to theirs. So it might be helpful if we were to circle back with Kathy and bring the specific categories that is really making the world of possibilities that could actually be asked for as mitigation.
She did say recreation is not just Vermont when I had a conversation with her. So anyway, what I wanted to propose to the Planning Commission, if it's of any interest, the Planning Commission, we could have a Planning Commissioner, a Conservation Commissioner, if they have an interest, work with staff to develop these comments. Connecticut River Conservancy said it's helpful to get one set of comments from the town. So, if we work together to kind of come up with the comments that we want to make, put it into a letter, share it with the select board, present it to them and see if they'll sign off on it, would be a good process for us to move forward and have the town be engaged in at least writing a letter. I know Vernon has written a letter in the past. I have a copy of that in my office. Kathy is more than willing to come to a meeting if this is something the Planning Commission wants to talk more about or hear more about. She would also, read it and help us frame any letter if we needed to do that. So. So my thought would be, we'd complete that by March to take it to the select board in March. If anybody has an interest in working on that.
I know that I personally have a few ideas that I came up with that I feel like,
Sounds like somebody on,
that the current hydropower operation from my vantage point isn't doing adequately to meet the other, criteria or subjects that they're supposed to also meet, not just producing hydropower.
sounds like somebody on Zoom might have had a few,
Yeah, but I don't know how much with limited time, if I'm not saying those things right now because I don't know, because we're short on time with an agenda item after this. I'd certainly be open, Sue, to meeting or just emailing those things and going, emailing back and forth a bit. But I don't know if Lindsay or Sarah or John, either of you feel particularly, we could also come back next meeting with a draft and you guys could get a better sense of what we're talking about.
I think it's worthwhile for us to participate in the process.
Yeah.
I would love to attend, to learn. I don't have anything to contribute, frankly. So,
Okay.
but I would love to listen and learn. If it's not too difficult.
Lindsay, were you saying you would like to participate outside of planning commission meetings, or you feel like the town should?
I feel like the town should participate in the process. I'd
Oh.
like the planning commission to be part of that. I don't think that I have the time necessarily to do more than review a draft and comment on that right now, but I would be happy to do that.
Okay. Sarah, chime in if you want, but okay, we have some interest, and at least I have just a few amateur ideas. And so.
Yeah, so I think
so
we'll
work
reach
on
out to the Conservation Commission and see if any of their interest was piqued. And then if there is interest, maybe we'll set up a meeting. I'll send it out. If not, staff will work on it and we'll share it with the commissions and committee.
Okay.
Yeah, commissions.
Okay. Let's move on to the last agenda item. This is about a couple grant projects that are in the works. And we briefly talked about them at previous meetings. And the municipal planning grant, that's a kind of consortium plan with other towns in our region it doesn't seem going to have as much Brattleboro Planning Commission involvement as, or even staff involvement as some of our other ones have, because, we've had a lot going on, and we have this Better Connections grant project, which is just focused on our town. And so I think staff provided a memo, or not a memo, but a draft RFP for that grant, and there's some things to consider with that.
Yeah. So we did get the RFP out, and we are putting together a steering committee. And it's been useful in the past to have a planning commissioner or two serve on the steering committee. We'll meet at certain times throughout the process to kind of review materials before they are taken to the public, or maybe after a public meeting. And, kind of help shape the process as it goes on. So I shared a copy of the RFP with you, and this is really about making, accommodating all forms of transportation in the Canal Street area, also looking at stormwater, because that was an extra add-on piece that we got, and we do have stormwater issues there, and also kind of planning for new development as well. So things like if Winston Prouty can do their infill housing, or other larger housing projects that might happen near that corridor. So, kind of doing what we were talking about earlier on Putney Road, how do we actually transform that from this 1960s suburban strip development into something that is more walkable and more pleasant for people to get across Canal Street or travel on Canal Street. So, I'm just curious if there's any planning commission interest in serving on this steering committee. There will be representatives from Public Works, from the planning department, probably the Brattleboro Coalition for Active Transportation, and we'll be doing some outreach for maybe the hospital or large employers in that area. Downtown Brattleboro Alliance had interest, and the chamber. So just trying to transform that area. And also residents of that area we'd like to include.
How much workload or meetings times do you envision for steering committee members?
Gosh, I probably should have counted. I would
Well, just generally.
Generally 5 to 6 meetings of about an hour.
Over a year?
Over a year. And then public meetings.
Would they be in
I'd
person?
be.
Sorry. Go ahead, Sarah.
That's okay. I said I'd be interested. I mean, I live right off of Canal Street, and it's a street that I'm on pretty frequently, so I can definitely envision the benefits of this, and I'm sure I'll have lots of ideas as it comes to fruition. So yeah, if that's the amount of meetings, I think that's definitely doable.
I'd be interested.
John, you'd be interested as well, you said?
Yeah, I've worked a lot with grants, but never in Vermont, never with public. That'd be very interesting.
I saw in the RFP that there may or may not be an in-person interview process depending on your decision.
Depending. So there'll be a review committee. Happy to have, it won't be as big as the steering committee, but happy to have a planning commissioner sit in on the review process. So it'll just be, if we feel we need interviews of consultants.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Actually, to be honest, having been on steering committees and been on working committees before, I would prefer to be on the working committee. I think you learn more that way.
Working committee. Do you know what he means by that?
Do you mean in it?
When you're talking about the details of it. Okay. Usually steering committee meetings are, here's the process, here we are to date, that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, that doesn't interest me.
Okay.
The working groups would be very interesting.
Okay.
But full disclosure, I live on Western, so I'm either unbiased, which is good, or not personally involved, which is bad.
It's good. You're on the planning commission.
If you needed commissioners to sit in on any sort of interview process, I would be open to doing that if I'm available.
Okay.
I'm also interested in the overall process. I'm glad that Sarah spoke up because I think we both live in the same sort of area, so I'm sure that you can handle it.
And Lindsay, you're not expressing interest to be on the steering committee? I remember what you said earlier about being swamped.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing about like when meetings come up and stuff, but I don't think that I should commit to anything more right now.
Okay. Guess we should give the opportunity to Dan and Todd, not necessarily at next meeting, but
I could reach out.
when we reach out to them.
Yeah.
Well, one about watching this meeting, so they're up to date on the proposer for the amended standard. Okay, I think that's good. At least two of you, so.
Yeah, so there's
I have-
nothing else to report on that for now, but just,
Okay.
yeah, looking for a little bit more commitment, so thank you, everybody. And then the other one, Tom alluded to, the Windham Cultural Plan, Windham Region Cultural Plan was awarded its funding, so Windham Regional Commission is going to do a lot of the grant administration of that, and, you know, it's really just for your notification. It's not a planning commission or even really a planning department. We're involved, but.
Yeah, will you be sitting on a
I'll
a
probably
committee for this?
Yeah, there'll probably be an advisory group that I'll be involved with that. I'll reach out to the Town Arts Committee.
Yeah.
They have some interest in this kind of work as well.
Well, keep us in mind if there's anything that's
Definitely.
has some, resemblance to our work, some
Yeah.
relation. I feel like since I've been on the planning commission, almost nearly everything we apply for, we get, or that we're a part of,
It does seem like we
that
get
gets
a lot of
applied for,
government
we
money.
get, so. Seems like a very high success rate.
Yeah.
Not that I've been involved with this
It's
stuff
a
anywhere
wonderful
else.
life.
What?
It's a wonderful life.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I guess we'll have our official public comment period. And seeing none in person and none on Zoom, that's the close of our public comment period.
Do we move to adjourn? Do I move to adjourn?
It can be done either way. We've finished all our business, so I can just adjourn us as the chair.
There you go.
Tom,
Oh, but before I do that,
sorry.
No.
I remembered that there was a line in the minutes that we approved earlier that I don't remember saying that was attributed to me.
okay. Do you know
I
which
did-
one that was?
That was the one that you brought to my attention.
I thought they were going to leave that all for you to say. No, I'm just- yeah, no, it was on the, where was it? The second page. It's like a one line.
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Ask for clarification of legal statutory context.
Elbert stated the requested change might not be appropriately comprehensive.
Okay.
When I was reviewing.
I
the
don't know. I
minutes-
think maybe something might have gotten lost in translation because I'm not sure what that sentence means. And so I guess I don't want it so directly attributed to me since I'm not sure.
That's kind of a spot zone. I read that as spot zoning type thing.
Okay. And that it may have just, like I said, been something that where someone was summarizing what I was saying, but I don't recall saying it that way. So I don't know.
We could just,
Oh,
we can,
Sue, Steve.
oh, you want to strike it?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So can I just make a motion to strike that sentence from the minutes of December?
I'll second that.
I got it. It's too funny.
Do we need a vote for that? I mean, if you guys aren't looking at the minutes, you don't know what we're talking about.
No, but I'll vote for striking it.
John's in
I mean-
favor?
Yeah, I mean, if she didn't make the comment, we shouldn't have it
Yeah.
attributed to her in the minutes.
All right, good rationale, in my opinion. All right, I'm in favor too. Lindsay? Lindsay's in favor, Sarah's in favor, okay. Yeah, when I was reviewing the minutes, I saw that was the only thing that jumped out at me as like, what does that mean? What's going on there? So I emailed Lindsay and then she wrote by email what she just said here, so. Okay, having completed our business, the meeting's adjourned.